Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, I'm Michael Barham, EPIP's Membership and Operations Manager, and your host for this afternoon session, our 7th EPIP webinar of 2015, Community Voices Heard, Engaging Constituents for Social, Economic, and Racial Justice. Community Voices Heard is a member-led, multiracial organization, principally women of color and low-income families in New York State that builds power to secure social, economic, and racial justice for all. They accomplish this through grassroots organizing, leadership development, policy changes, and creating new models of direct democracy. Today, we'll learn how CVH builds leadership development and collective power towards broader goals of government transparency, social justice, and we'll explore case studies around a few impact issues. We'll also learn what it looks like to fund this work from the New York Foundation. Hopefully, you'll learn how funding community engagement can fit into a broader social change grant-making strategy. We're joined today both by Sandra Udelman, the Executive Director of Community Voices Heard, and by Kevin Ryan, Program Director at the New York Foundation. So we'll hear a lot from Sandra about how CVH does their work, and we'll learn from Kevin about what it's meant to fund this work for a while, and really about the time and commitment that it takes, both at the grassroots level and from the funder perspective. So we're really excited to start this conversation. I'm going to walk through a few quick items of housekeeping and introduce our speakers in a bit more detail shortly, but before I do, just want to familiarize those of you who don't know too much about EPIP with who we are and what we do. We're a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. We provide a platform for our community not only to connect with others, but learn and practice leadership skills and inspire emerging transformative thoughts in the social sector. Hopefully we're going to do a bit of all of this today and really get a great conversation going. So what's next on our calendar? Big ticket item for us is our upcoming EPIP National Conference. It's taking place in New Orleans, Louisiana. We're very, very excited about it through plenary sessions, workshops, learning tours. We'll be exploring a plethora of issues in the South around social justice, arts and culture, and learn kind of how philanthropy can adapt to meet today's greatest challenges. Registration is still open. It'll be open for almost a full week, so it is certainly not too late. If you're interested, please reach out for more information, and as always, you can also check out epip.org/events for more info. It's also the final month for our MC Mall campaign, the 7th month applied learning campaign. We're focusing on a new skill each month. This month's being innovation and problem solving. Join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag EPIP Leaders, and of course follow us at EPIP National. And for those of you who are not yet members of EPIP, as you can see, we have a big conference on the docket, a whole bunch of local, national events coming up. It's a great time to get involved. If you want to learn more, you can visit epip.org/membership or contact me, give us a call. We're always happy to talk with members and potential members. Okie doke, a couple items quickly of housekeeping. As you all can see, you're kept on mute for the time being. If you have questions, technical difficulties, general content questions, please use the question box to submit those. We'll be reserving about 10 minutes or so towards the end of the presentation for Q&A. We'll be perusing the question box throughout to make sure there are no issues, and also to just keep an eye on those questions as they're submitted, and we'll make sure to pose those first to Kevin and Sandra. If for some reason you have to hop off early, we are recording this webinar. You can visit our website within about a week. It will be posted. And please help us, always looking to improve our webinars and programs in general. So complete the post-webinar survey. That'll be prompted, or you'll be prompted to complete that after the webinar ends. Okie doke. So as I mentioned, we are joined by Sandra Udelman. She is the Executive Director at Community Voices Heard. She has been at CVH since 2000 and was named the organization's Executive Director in March 2007. She was previously CVH's Director of Public Policy and Research. She has worked both in the United States and abroad to achieve social and economic justice through organizing. Kevin Ryan is the Program Director at New York Foundation. He came to New York Foundation in 2002 and manages a portfolio of active grants for startup organizations that focus on community organizing and advocacy. And he also oversees the Foundation's capacity building program that includes workshops, small grants, and individual technical assistance requests. Kevin's also an adjunct instructor at Hunter College Graduate School of Urban Affairs and Planning and the Murphy Institute for Worker Education and Labor Studies. So we'll hear from Sandra first, then Kevin. Really excited to get the conversation going and hear from both of them. They have a lot to say on these issues and a lot for us to learn. So without further ado, I am going to toss it to the two of them, and we're also going to quickly pause as I share Sandra's screen, so bear with us momentarily, folks, and we should hear from Sandra shortly. Sandra, Kevin, welcome.
Thanks so much, Michael. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen clearly.
Okay, terrific. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be able to share some time with you and share some lessons and thoughts about engaging constituents for social, racial, and economic justice. As Michael said, I am the Executive Director of Community Voices Heard, and I'll start by giving you a little bit of background on the organization so you have a sense of the perspective that I bring to this conversation, then sort of frame out what community engagement is in an array of different social change strategies, and then use 3 case studies to highlight different approaches to engagement that we've used in various projects that we've been involved in that might be useful for all of you on the call to think about when thinking about your own organizations that you're supporting and grant making and approaches to social change and how you can incorporate some of these strategies and tactics into the work that you're doing. So a little background on Community Voices Heard. We were founded as a welfare rights organization in New York City back in 1994-95. The organization really was founded by welfare recipients in response to negative stereotypes and discourse around welfare issues that was bubbling up at the national level and was soon to be reflected in policies and programs locally at the state level and at the national level that really shifted the way welfare recipients were able to receive support for their families. And a group of welfare recipients in New York City came together and wanted to organize collectively to make sure that their voice was at the table as policymakers were deciding the future of their families and their lives. We've since evolved to become a multi-issue and multi-chapter organization. We're no longer just in New York City, but we also have chapters in 3 other counties around New York State, in Westchester, Orange, and Dutchess counties, as a way to sort of expand our breadth in terms of membership and be able to really influence policy change at not only the city level and the county level, but also the state level around issues that are important to our members. I believe Michael mentioned what we do, but just to review it again, our mission is we are a member-led multiracial organization, principally women of color and low-income families in New York State, that build power to secure social, economic, and racial justice for all. And we accomplish this through utilizing a variety of strategies: grassroots organizing, leadership development, promoting policy changes, and creating new models of direct democracy. And I'll talk about a couple of these examples through the case studies. And you can see here a couple of a former and a current board member of ours standing with the new mayor, Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City. So our programmatic priorities as an organization are fourfold. We focus on winning campaigns that are going to create concrete changes in policies, programs, and budgets that impact low-income families. We focus on growing and developing membership among directly affected people so that they can be their own agents of change and hone their already innate leadership abilities to really be able to wield power to influence change that they want to see in society. We focus on building regional power so that we can then also expand together with other organizations across the state to have state power to influence change when it needs to take place at a state level. And we focus on expanding our electoral impact because of recognizing the importance of low-income people getting out to vote so that their issues and priorities aren't forgotten as discussions take place. So there's a number of different change strategies that are utilized throughout social justice work, and this is a sort of typography of 4 different ones that I think is helpful in just thinking about the array of strategies that organizations use and also that funders support, so that I can couch particularly where organizing engagement sits in this continuum, but also see it as part of a bigger network of important work that needs to happen across the board. So service is probably the approach that most people are most familiar with. It's a type of change that's helping people and really involves direct support to people to address their basic needs. So some examples of that are soup kitchens, shelters, workforce development programs, and things like that. Development, I like to think of as sort of the bricks and mortar. This is a type of change that involves self-help and community investment. Sometimes this is where you would find community gardens, housing development, housing developers, cooperative creation. So entities that are providing support and tools for people to build themselves up in their community in concrete projects. Advocacy is another change strategy that we're all quite familiar with. One thing that's important in looking at advocacy versus organizing and engagement is the type of change and who's in power in that scenario and who's leading the struggle. So in advocacy, what you find is people advocating on behalf of other people or doing for people. Really important critical work, but different from an organizing and engagement strategy where people that are directly affected by issues are doing the work themselves and actually have direct voice. So advocacy, you would find things like class action lawsuits, policy think tanks that write reports and release them about various critical topics, lobby firms. Whereas in organizing engagement, you have organizing groups like Community Voices Heard and an array of groups across the country in local communities and at statewide levels that many of you probably know about and or support. And then you have some of these also bigger sort of movement-oriented networks that are also happening right now that are taking over the news and are starting to shape the discourse nationally on a more movement-based front. So you've got things like the Fast Food Forward campaign that just mobilized in 200 cities across the country, the Fight for 15 in the Union. You have dreamers that have been at the forefront of the immigrant rights battle, fighting directly for their own self-interests in trying to get access to higher education and an ability to live and work in the United States. And you have recently the Black Lives Matter movement that's really been lifting up the importance of Black lives in the context of the America we're all actually trying to build. And this, of course, is on the forefront of our minds right now as things unfold in Baltimore and as they have across the country. And these last category of groups are doing organizing and engagement directly with affected people. Again, I am grounded in an organizing group, so this is a strategy that I think is really critical and important, but recognize it in the context of all of these other strategies. And one of the things I'm hoping to do in highlighting a couple of these case studies is just list up why thinking about all of these different strategies interplaying together is really important in any funding strategy that's going to impact social change for the long haul. So why community engagement? Directly affected people have a grounded perspective and expertise that is quite unique and quite critical to have at the table. From understanding in a daily basis in the field, in their communities, in their places of work, exactly what's happening. That actually is often different than what laws and policies say is happening. So having that direct expertise at the table is really important. Issues that matter most in communities may actually be distinct from those that are crafted in policy shops. We often find that the things that our members will want to work on and bring to the table are not necessarily the sexiest of issues in the advocacy world. And things that the advocacy world thinks are really important may not be the things that our members are ready to get out of bed, go onto the streets, and really take to those in power. So I think the array of issues becomes much more full when you have an array of players that are each taking their part of it. And when you do community engagement, you have ownership of the constituency and the community, which is truly essential to long-term change, not only for making sure that policy and programmatic changes actually are happening on the ground, but making sure that people will lead the implementation of those and make sure that the communities are getting what they need over the long haul. So things like a report that's released doesn't just sit on a shelf, but it's actually playing out in a day-to-day basis in communities as people mobilize. So case study number one is what I would refer to as a sort of typical organizing campaign, which is the type of work that Community Voices Heard does predominantly around an array of different issues. An organizing campaign for us that's been a really important one over the years has been focusing on organizing welfare recipients around various aspects of welfare reform. And when the National Federal Welfare Reform Act was enacted in 1996 and the state of New York then enacted its policies in 1997, what we saw in the state of New York was a real punitive policy increase, particularly in the form of unpaid work that welfare recipients were being made to do in order to receive their paychecks. And this is a program called Workfare, or in New York City, the Work Experience Program. This was something that was the most upsetting to welfare recipients who were working side by side with union workers but weren't getting a paycheck. They were doing the work, they wanted to work, they wanted the paycheck, but they wanted the dignity of that paycheck, a real supervisor that could serve as a reference check, the benefits of the Earned Income Tax Credit and other worker benefits and paying into Social Security, and they were finding that they were just being forced to stay in these dead-end unpaid jobs. And that became a really critical campaign from the perspective of people directly affected. It's a campaign, sadly, that we've had to fight for 20 years. It's one that a lot of other kinds of organizing, other kinds of social change groups might have given up ages ago. But because we've been working with directly affected people, no one that's doing this program is ready to give up. And no one that has done it and has moved on is ready to put it beside them. So the energy from directly affected people is really maintained around these issues until they're truly won. Not based on funding trends, not based on policy trends and political discourse, but really based on the real change that they need to see in their lives. So some of the things that we've been able to win through this, we focus a lot on changing the narrative through engagement. So having people directly affected out there on the streets talking about the work that they were doing and not getting paid really helped to counter the myth of welfare recipients as lazy and to shift the discourse to one of welfare recipients being exploited workers. So through mobilizing people in the community that were affected by this policy, we've been able to shift in the city of New York and the state of New York the way that this program is really perceived. We also, through a number of different organizing tactics, were able to keep the problems with the system highlighted throughout the years, whether it was releasing reports to expose problems with the system, with both the unpaid work system as well as the mandated job search and job readiness programs and how they weren't meeting the needs for welfare recipients, providing testimony at public hearings with people directly affected by the programs, getting up and speaking directly to the legislators about their experience, having individual and mass meetings with legislators to educate them on the issue and hold them accountable to moving on the issue, and sometimes taking it to the streets and putting pressure on decision makers through actions. For instance, since Hillary Clinton is now in the news a lot, when we were mobilizing around some of the federal aspects of the program and trying to push for her to take a stand against the WEP program as part of the national policy, she gave us a commitment she was going to do it. She backed off, and we went with 4 busloads of people to her front lawn in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of waffles to send the message that she was waffling on our issues and we weren't going to take it. And thankfully, after that kind of a mobilization, then Senator Hillary Clinton went back to her original commitment to stand against the unpaid WEP program. And while we were doing this campaign, we've been mobilizing workers, the WEP workers themselves, in a way that's also been able to move our union allies. We released a report that really highlighted the issue of WEP as a public sector sweatshop. And through that, we're able to get the largest public sector union in New York City, District Council 37, with over 120,000 workers, to join us in this campaign to fight back against this program that was also displacing their workers. Through perseverance, we were able to be victorious on a number of different levels through this kind of community engagement organizing approach. We were able to win the creation of a paid transitional jobs program in both New York City and state, which is a 6 to 12-month program where people now just recently started to receive $11.50 an hour, an increase in the wage that we're really excited about. About 2,500 people per year are in the program, and in addition to doing work and getting a real paycheck, they're also able to get education and training and take training 1 day a week, so that at the end of that period of a transitional job, they're in a better position to market themselves for long-term unsubsidized employment. We've also been moving legislation at the state level to end the work experience program. So trying to tackle it both in New York City, but also recognizing the importance of changing state law for long-term victory on this issue. And last year, we were able to get 48 Assembly members and 18 Senate members to sponsor the legislation and 50 organizational supporters. So we're still in the process at the state level of moving that, but there's been some incredible progress in a pretty short amount of time. And most recently, and the thing we're most excited about, is an announcement in New York City about the phase out of the program. So just last year, with the appointment of a new commissioner to the City Welfare Agency, because of all the work that our members had done over the years to highlight the problems of this issue and the need for ending this program and creating more positive alternatives, the new commissioner announced and wrote into the state employment plan that he's going to phase out this program and work instead to create other kinds of alternatives that we're now working with the administration as well as the large unions in New York City to figure out those concrete alternatives. So that's one case study to give an example of an organizing campaign that really brought together directly affected people over the years to fight a fight that no one else really thought was important enough to sustain. So case study number 2 is about community visioning. This is something that I think even if organizations are not doing on-the-ground organizing work and trying to move policy and legislation, a lot of the things that are happening in our communities are it's very critical to have the voice of local people, residents, in our case, low-income families that are at the table. So an example here of the use of a community visioning process took place in New York City recently with the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA. Unfortunately, this agency, which houses over 450,000 public housing residents in New York City, and is running a huge amount of huge budget gap, and the conditions in public housing have been pretty atrocious over the years, and the management has not been doing what it needed to do. So repairs and mold and all kinds of problems exist in the housing. And there's a real long history of disengagement and distrust of the New York City Housing Authority. When a new commissioner or chair of NYCHA came in, Shola Olatoye, who you can see in the middle of this photo on your screen in the pink shirt, she wanted to take a new approach to engagement. And she actually then externally went out and said, first of all, I know that engagement done in the right way takes resources, so I cannot just call a meeting and expect people to come and then say I've done my job, but I actually need to provide funds or raise additional funds to actually give to groups in the community on the ground to go and meet with people, groups that are trusted to be able to engage people in a process that can get me the information that I need. So she raised funds for trusted and experienced community groups like Community Voices Heard to do the actual engagement work. And we piloted a process up in Millbrook houses up in the Bronx where we utilized a variety of different approaches and a multi-phase engagement process to bring people into the discussion to really plan what the vision was that they had for the future of their building development and NYCHA at large. In a 6-week period of time, we knocked 1,200 doors and had conversations with those 1,200 people in this one particular development. We gathered 750 surveys, so using surveys as a way to gather information and data from a wide array of people in the buildings about what was important to them. We put together 19 lobby meetings, so right in the lobby of the buildings. One of the easiest places to get together and meet is right downstairs. So we had a strategy to do that in the buildings and do it repetitive number of times to pull people out to talk about their concerns and issues and their suggestions for improvements. We had 4 leadership meetings and with about 400 attendees, and then 3 facilitated visioning sessions with about 300 attendees, and 1 big report back with the final plan that was crafted from the opinions of all of the different people involved. And you see some photos here of various group meetings where people are engaged in talking about what their vision is. And now that we have a leadership committee in Millbrook Houses, they're able to do ongoing monitoring and make sure that they're holding the New York City Housing Authority accountable for doing what it is that they said that they would do. Important outcomes in this type of a visioning process are that community members and residents have input into an agency plan or a vision for a community, that there's then ownership of a project and a community that really wants to see that project through to its fulfillment, that there's development of local leadership through the process of engagement. As I mentioned, there were lobby meetings that people led, there were leadership team meetings, and then there were moments and opportunities that people had to facilitate small groups. And then the creation of a local leadership team that can do the ongoing monitoring. And in the case of Community Voices Heard, the connection of this local team to a citywide committee that we have of public housing residents all over the 5 boroughs of New York City to then be able to propose bigger things and bigger solutions that the New York City Housing Authority can do. So my last case study is around participatory budgeting. And some of you might have heard about this new innovative way of doing governance in the United States, new to the United States, not so new to the rest of the world. There's over 3,000 models of participatory budgeting out there in the world. It originated down in Porto Alegre, Brazil, when the Workers' Party decided to set up a structure wherein people would directly be able to decide where some of the public monies in their community were being spent. In the case of Brazil and in Porto Alegre, it was 20% of the discretionary budget, so a huge amount of money that government basically said, hey, the people themselves are going to know what's really needed, and they're going to value distributing the resources to the communities that need it most. In the case of New York City, the program that we've been successful in piloting actually provides capital discretionary funds at the level of city council districts, at least $1 million per city council district, where residents get to directly decide how that money is spent. It's a multi-phase process, and you can see here the icons sort of point out the fact that we start with ideas and brainstorms. We have a team of people come up with concrete project ideas. We then have a vote where people directly decide which projects they want to be funded, and then the money gets dedicated to those projects. So a couple of slides to bring to life this kind of a process. In September, October, November, there are neighborhood assemblies when ideas are collected from broad arrays of people in the community, as well as volunteers step up to decide to be budget delegates and take those ideas and put them into concrete project proposals. The budget delegate committees then get organized within the district according to a variety of themes, from parks to education to housing to seniors and youth. And then between the months of November and February, they meet every 2 to 3 weeks as committees to take all of the ideas that came up from the neighborhood assemblies, to go do additional research in their community to truly assess need, to prioritize projects based on need, and to interface with the city agencies to find out exactly how much those projects would cost if they were going to be able to get them funded. They then have project expos where they demonstrate their projects to the community. There's not a photo in this one of it, but they create sort of big science fair type presentations of their projects and invite the community in to see what it is that these different projects are that are going to be on the ballot. And then there's an actual ballot that gets created in multiple languages in the district. Anybody age 16 and up can vote. In some districts, even age 14 and up. All you need to do is reside in a district and show that you're a resident there. Undocumented individuals are able to vote, formerly incarcerated, even if they wouldn't be able to vote in traditional elections, and young people. So we're really focusing on engaging the broad array of the electorate into this process. The vote that just recently happened in New York City, as an example, we've actually gotten to the point where we started with just 4 council members participating and $4 million 4 years ago. And just last week, there were 50,000 people that voted across 24 city council districts, and $30 million was at stake. So it's an exciting way of really engaging the community in something real, because there's real money invested in real projects and real decision-making power. So as I wrap up, I just want to highlight a few things that sort of bring together the most important process elements and best practices to consider around community engagement that tie through all 3 of these examples, and hopefully through other examples that you have all seen or that you may be able to support in the future. So one thing that's really important is that engagement is tailored to the context. You saw in these 3 case studies, there are very different kinds of engagement processes that were utilized, but engagement was important in all of them. So thinking about the context that you're creating an engagement process around. Consider utilizing varied approaches, from surveys to focus groups to door knocking to mass meetings to smaller one-on-one conversations. People engage in different ways. Creative approaches and creative and artistic moments are also really a great way to engage people that wouldn't typically engage. So thinking about the variety of approaches is really an important way to tap into the variety of people. Repeated engagement over time. Coming together as a collective and as a community is sort of countercultural at this moment. So the first moment that people are together in a space is not always the moment that they're the most ready to engage at the deepest level. So thinking about the fact that multiple moments of engagement are important to be able to get people ready to engage at the deepest level. Allow for varied levels of engagement. There are going to be people with lots of time that can come to 4 or 5 meetings and be on a leadership team and monitor things over the long haul, and there's other people that can only come to one thing or can only participate in a survey. So looking at different levels of engagement and being okay for that and incorporating it into the approach can be really important. Ensuring feedback loops exist. Sometimes some of the best engagement processes do a great job of involving people, but then never report back to people on what the outcomes were, and never bring people back together to monitor and fight for the implementation of what the plan is that's visioned. So it's really important to mark in that sort of long-term process and feedback. Encourage real decision-making power. One of the things that people that are engaged in a process hate most is if they feel like it's just a window dressing so that someone can say, well, you've had a moment to speak, and therefore engagement has happened, but that there's not real decision-making power that's given. So you saw an example in participatory budgeting of real concrete decision-making power when people actually get to vote on money. Actually being able to vote on projects, proposals, policies, and money can be a really empowering thing and can be the most important thing around making engagement seem real. And realizing that engagement never really ends. You kick-started in this kind of a process, but the real need is for engagement to happen over time. So best practices to consider, it's really important to offer language access and to think about translation and interpretation if you're going to engage the diversity of a population in a community, to facilitate that engagement so that people that have many stresses on their lives can actually see themselves participating. If food's available at meetings, childcare, Metro cards in the case of New York City, transportation support more broadly. Translation and interpretation, again, another type of facilitated engagement. Partner with trusted groups. One of the things that's really important is to think about who can do the engagement and do it well, rather than asking entities that don't do engagement to do it. The partnership between the local community organizations and the entities that want the engagement can be useful, but really having the community groups be at the lead of crafting a process and leading a process so that the trust that they've built with the community benefits the process. Providing technical assistance, facilitators, designers, lawyers, organizers, it depends on what type of process it is, but you want to make sure that the community and the community groups have the skills that they need and the assistance that they need to have the right kinds of conversations. And resource the work. As I said, it takes a lot of time and energy to do engagement. It's not something that you just put out a flyer and people show up. So staff time, materials, a Canvas team, stipends for participants, all of those things can be really helpful in creating the most robust process. So finally, as a wrap-up, Important takeaways around community engagement is, one, community engagement can be incorporated into all kinds of work, and it shouldn't just be relegated just to only in the organizing space. In all of the different change strategies that I mentioned, engagement and ownership of the community and constituency is really important. So thinking about how these principles can be applied to an array of work is really important. Groups already trusted in the community should be sought to lead the engagement processes. As I mentioned before, if you have an untrusted source going out and trying to engage people, you're not going to have nearly as much success as if a real trusted community partner is at the helm. Engagement takes time. It's important to incorporate ample time into projects. And when you're really talking about developing leaders and developing organizing capacity and engagement capacity over time, you're not even just talking about a 6-week process, you're talking about years. And so as funders, one of the things that's really important to think about in building leadership and building community is how can you invest over the long haul? Because none of this stuff is an instant fix. It's stuff that really needs support for a long period of time, but has payoff in the long run of really powerful connections and networks within communities. And there are a lot of examples of good practices and processes. I have just mentioned 3. There's plenty more that are out there. Look to what's worked when crafting processes to engage the community and or when seeking out organizations that you're thinking of supporting that are doing this work. And with that, I wrap up my presentation and I will hand it over to Kevin Ryan of the New York Foundation.
Thanks, Andre. So I'm acting as a respondent, so I'm going to be very brief. Just to give you a sense of New York Foundation in short, we were established in 1909 with a $1 million gift. We were interested and have been interested in startup and untested programs from the very beginning, and just 2 examples of that. Very early on, we funded visiting nurses services, and we also share an anniversary and funded the NAACP at its founding stage. And because of that, our definition of organizing is a little bit broader than what Sandra described. We do believe in funding organizations that engage in leadership development, issue campaign development, membership base building, direct action tactics, and playing leading roles in collaborations and alliances and coalitions that help to change public policy to support communities. But we also believe that and consider organizations, particularly because we fund a significant number of startup organizations, we believe in supporting organizations that are engaged in community engagement, community building, and what we also call pre-organizing activities. And those would include creating opportunities for broad community participation, pushing racial equity strategies, lifting culture, history, and healing as a central component of any type of social change work, integrating other strategies including human services, community development, activism, to help bring community together and really establish a level of trust so that community members feel deeply engaged in the issues and feel that they are able to participate. So a lot of the grant making we do actually operates between and the intersection of organizing, services, and development strategies. So the first thing I have to start when I even think about funding a group like Community Voice Heard, we've started funding Community Voice Heard back in 1994 with a 5-year startup grant. And we've had 4 subsequent grants with them since then, in addition to grants we've made to them to support some of the coalition work, for example, like the participatory budgeting work that Sandra mentioned earlier. But I think it really starts with the leadership of the institution. If it wasn't for the fact that we, partially because of the history, but also that we have a board that supports risk-taking and grant-making. And risk-taking and grant-making, as you all know, is not risk-taking in the sense of the real definition of the word risk. Most grant makers want to see projects that are established and well-tested before they are willing to invest resources in those organizations. But the reality of it is that those organizations had to come from somewhere, and they had to have some initial funding and even funding at the emerging stages to be able to build their organizations to the point where the work is established and they have a track record. Our board has always been willing to actually focus on that startup and emerging stage to try to help groups build the foundation and capacity that they need to engage in the type of campaigns and issues that Sandra mentioned before. So we invested in a very early stage, and when I think about the keys to support for groups like Community Voices Heard, it's really very simple and follows a lot of what Sandra said. I mean, Community Voices Heard develops community leaders and develops their staff to be able to work closely with community and build community leadership, to really have effective campaigns and build community leadership to take on key roles in those campaigns. There's a big vision. How do you build power, and power that can actually challenge and influence policy? The only way to really do that is to have a vision about that long-term strategy. As Sandra said, these are all good practices and strategies, but the engagement never comes to an end. So there's always has to be a big vision around those strategies. And then another thing that Sandra did not mention, but I think is important to Community Voices Heard's development, as well as many other groups, is the use of capacity building resources. The foundation, as Michael said at the beginning, we actually have a capacity building program, and we deeply encourage grantees to participate in workshops, to use our small grants program, and to use our consultants that we work with. And one great example of this is in 2005, when Community Voices Heard was going through a leadership transition and Sandra was transitioning to the executive director position, we actually made a grant. Community Voices Heard came up with a great transition plan that had overlapping time between the longtime director and Sandra, and really the plan was well developed. It asked for resources from several different funders and was crafted so that the leadership transition could be as smooth as possible. And a lot of groups would not think through the transition process and develop a strategy around how to go through it. And CVH did that, along with attending trainings and participating in other activities that the foundation has held over the years. The other piece of it I would also lift up is evolving strategy. As Sandra mentioned to you, the start of Community Voices Heard was really about welfare reform work. But as you can see from the variety of programs and campaigns that they're engaged in, they've expanded beyond that and are constantly thinking about what are the most important issues facing members and how might they engage in leading campaigns or working in coalitions with other groups that include a wide range of organizations that include other organizing groups, advocacy groups, and service groups to actually be able to move forward those campaigns and win those campaigns. And then the last piece I would say is when you look at the organization, what you really see is great organizing work, solid policy analysis, creative tactics, as Sandra's waffle example pointed out, and then a very deep, broad, and loyal membership that really feels so comfortable and at home in Community Voices Heard and feels like that they can participate in leadership decisions at every level throughout the organization, which is very unique to community-based organizations. And then the last thing I'll say is Community Voices Heard has developed their organization, their model and structure in a way that now makes them a mentor group. We have often recommended Community Voices Heard staff and member leaders to new and emerging organizations to really help them explore how they can use community organizing to address some of the challenges that exist in their neighborhood. So they're actually spreading the message and the strategy to other groups and helping other groups to try to build their capacity to where Community Voices Heard is now. So I'll stop there and I'll pass it back to you, Mike.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin. Thanks so much, Sandra. That was really interesting, and thanks, Sandra, for sharing that infographic from the New York Foundation. Folks, you should be able to see that as well.
Tiny. It's tiny, but it's in the very middle of the page. You can see Community Voices Heard, their trajectory as a grantee over the past 20 years.
Right. And you can see the commitment New York Foundation makes to so many organizations,
Yep.
and how long you've been supporting some of these. So that's a really interesting infographic, and like we mentioned, folks will not only be sharing the recording afterwards, but also the slides, so you can get a closer look at some of this and some of those organizations. So folks, now we have, as we mentioned initially, a bit of time to open up for a little Q&A. Sandra and Kevin are certainly experts in this area, and we've learned a lot from them already, so it's a great time to kind of throw a few questions their way, and I'll keep a lookout. Remember, use the question box. Doesn't look like we have any coming in yet. I'll give you folks a bit more time, and I have a few questions of my own, folks. That was really, really interesting, and obviously you both talked a lot about risk-taking and taking chances and experimenting with both from the funder and the local perspective. Just the need to kind of incorporate a bunch of different approaches and see kind of what sticks. But if I'm making the case, Kevin, this is probably for you. If I'm trying to make the case at a foundation or a small foundation for my organization to begin supporting some of this work, and you already certainly went into some of that already, but what are like some just key points that I need to hammer home to the higher ups, the decision makers?
Mm-hmm. Michael, I think that it's a hard thing in a lot of institutions to really push for supporting groups that may be outside of the general profile of groups that a foundation or bank or other institution may fund. I think it really is more about lifting up strategies. Community Voices Heard is a great example of a group from an early stage that really wanted to tackle an issue that affected so many different people around welfare reform. And I think when you look at that, the campaign that they started from the beginning would have an impact on the clients of many of the service groups that so many of us have funded over the years. And that impact would be a real positive one, and it would be across a wide range of the population. And I think a way to kind of sell this sometimes is how the organizing work and community engagement work actually connects in with some of the service programs and work that we fund to help enhance and move forward some of the service strategies that are out there. And then I also think it's another way to look at it is, when we look at most organizations as a whole, organizations use various strategies to engage community and get things done. So you may find service groups that have community engagement strategies, and by actually strengthening those community engagement strategies, which could lead to organizing in the long term, you're actually helping those groups to do better and stronger work. And then the last thing I would say is building networks, and I know that's what EPIP is so much about, building networks, your own network with other funders who may fund in different strategy areas and who you can partner with to talk about different work and strategies is extremely important in this field. The way that we've been able to encourage some of our colleagues who don't support organizing work is for us to actually go and talk in coalition about various strategies and find ways to connect across issue. And that happens all the time in this field. It could be a way, as you connect in coalitions and funder collaboratives, to actually open up your foundation to support more broader community engagement work.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. That was a comprehensive answer, for sure. And we are certainly about, here at EPIP, just trying to share different strategies that are really effective. So thanks for that answer. We actually had a question come in from Hillary for you, Kevin, and she noticed that the foundation, there were some breaks in funding for some of the organizations on the previous slide that we were looking at, and she noticed that the foundation came back to some grantees after breaks in support, and she's wondering what led the foundation to reinvest in their work. Was there a change in leadership, a change in strategy? Obviously, that'll vary across some of these organizations, but is there any kind of broader answer?
Yeah, I wish I had something really exciting to say about this one, but we actually give startup organizations 5 years of support, and then they have to take a year off. There are a few exceptions that you'll see on the timeline, and those exceptions are usually when we funded a coalition project of with an organization partnering with other groups. But that really is the main reason you see the breaks, is because a group may apply, they'll go through a grant, and then we might not hear from them for a couple of years, and they'll reapply again, and that really is how the process has worked. In a few cases, the foundation, the group at the very top, the Jacob Reese Neighborhood Settlement House, is an interesting example. We funded them as a startup, I don't know, 50 years ago, many years ago. And then they came back in various stages to build, at one point, build an advocacy program, at another point, build a senior leadership program, and most recently, to try to incorporate community organizing and engagement strategies within their service program. So groups will come back to us at various times. Leadership changes are not necessarily a part of that. A lot of it is, as they're developing and evolving their strategy, they'll come back to us when they have developed some type of engagement or organizing strategy, because most of the groups in New York who are community-based groups and know our grant making understand that strategy is the framework that we use to do our grant making. And if they're engaging in any of that type of work, they will be willing to explore a grant opportunity and possibly invest in their work.
Got it. Great. Makes a lot of sense. I actually have a question for you, Sandra. Looks like we haven't had anything else come in from attendees, but we'll still keep that open, folks. And Sandra, I'm just wondering, similar question for you. If if I'm an organization, let's say, that's more focused on traditional advocacy, and I'm not ready to make a full jump into organizing and engagement work, but maybe kind of dip my toe in the water. What are some kind of easier light lifts, baby steps to get started?
Sure. I think that, one thing is even thinking about if you're an organization that's an advocacy group or a service group and you're wanting to start to dip in, I think a really useful thing can be even surveying the clients in that circumstance, surveying the clients or the constituents that you're advocating for or that you're providing services to find out about their interests. Bringing people together in small focus groups can be a good way of engaging people. And then what I've often found in settings like that is that because an organization itself may not have the capacity to run an organizing project or house an organizer, sometimes then there will be interesting partnerships that take place between advocacy and service groups and organizing groups. And people will think about, how can we connect our clients to an organizing group or to an organizing campaign that's going on around the issues that we hear them bubbling up in the more service capacity that we're interacting with people from. So we've also seen sometimes groups like that will host someone from an organizing group to come and do a training, a Know Your Rights training, or a 101 basics in organizing for a group of people, or a series of trainings, and host someone else from outside coming in and working with a group of people. But then it's always really important in those steps to think about what you're willing to do beyond that. and be clear about that from the beginning. If you're not going to be able to sustain an organizer and an organizing campaign within an organization, I think then figuring out with this external partner, what kind of ongoing support are they going to be able to give or not, how long is the series of workshops or trainings, and what's the outcome that's expected. Because what you don't want to do is sort of excite people about getting engaged and then not have anywhere to refer them or engage them.
Right. That was a great answer. That makes a lot of sense. And sometimes just keep it simple and be clear. All right, well, it looks like we haven't had any other questions come in, so and we're right up almost at 4 p.m., so just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you learned something. I certainly learned a lot, and of course, really want to thank you, Kevin and Sandra, for the presentation. So educational for us, and it was really interesting, and hopefully folks will come back and view the recording as well.
Michael, can I mention one thing before we sign off?
Of course.
This is the infographics that we shared. This is 2 we shared. We'll be actually completing a community organizing data set in the next couple weeks, and it actually looks at our support for organizing over the last 10 years. And so once those infographics are done, we'd be happy to share it with all of you. So if you're interested in taking a look at those infographics, just let Michael know, and we'll be sure to add you to our email list and get that information to you.
Great. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks again, Sandra. And thanks to everyone for joining us, and hopefully you all can enjoy the rest of this beautiful Wednesday. Have a great one.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, folks.